Pam Godboys here, and it's pose analysis time again. So today we're going to analyze lizard pose. So I'm going to just jump right into it and tell you what's going on. So we'll start with the front foot. We've got dorsiflexion, flexion at the knee, pretty deep flexion at the front hip. Maybe a little, we've got a fold in here with the torso, maybe a little anterior tilt of the pelvis. Internal rotation of the back leg, extension of the back leg, flexion at the back knee, and I'm choosing dorsiflexion of the back foot. What I see in this pose with my clients is struggles around things like hip flexion, that deep hip flexion with adduction, with keeping the knee to the midline, and that can be a challenge, certainly, with that deep hip flexion. The second is that fold inside the leg. The third factor in this pose that can really be a struggle for people is extension at that back hip. So that first area, hip flexion at that front leg, along with the adduction of staying hugging in towards the midline. The barrier that I tend to see, or the limiting factor, tends to be impingement, or like a colliding of bone to bone, or a colliding of bone to sensitive or tight muscle, often the hip flexors. And then the other piece being the weakness in the inner leg line for why the knee drops out to the side. Sometimes it's also to accommodate that, that discomfort, right? So if we move the thigh bone to the side, we change the relationship between the thigh bone and the pelvis, then sometimes we feel a little bit less discomfort. So I'm going to start with a balancing pose. So we'll come into a balance and draw the knee up. And then in this pose, we're going to take our hands and place them behind the front leg, kind of middle of the thigh. And then in this position, while we're standing here and balancing, we'll press straight down through the front heel as if you're stomping, I don't know, a grape. I just had a conversation with somebody about a winery. So pretend you're stomping a grape. And then release. And when you're stomping that grape, what you want is your the underline of the leg, the butt, the hamstrings to fire up. So you can release and then press down, and then release and then press down, and release. Let's do one more, press down, release. Cool. So now we're going to translate that into the pose. And what this will do is the pressing down of the heel, which will fire up the back of the leg line, will allow, the body just does this naturally, the hip flexors to let go just a little bit. And so when the hip flexors let go, we might find a little bit more range of motion. So we'll come down into pose. While we're here, press straight down into that front heel so that the underside of the leg fires up. Cool. And then we're going to press into the inner heel. Instead of just pressing into the heel and having it be the outer heel, let's roll to press to the inner heel. And you'll notice that the knee will hug in towards the shoulder because you're now starting to activate the inner leg line a little bit more. So it will create a little bit of a rotation or an adduction, a hugging in, activating those adductor inner leg line muscles. So cool, so that's number one. The second is that fold, right? The fold inside, which often has to do with range of motion in the pelvis. And so we're gonna come to, I'm gonna bring feet to about hip width distance. Snag my block. And I want you to grab a block or something, maybe 2 blocks, something that you can put your hands on. We'll bend the knees. We're gonna press down into the heels and start to pull the heels apart like you're trying to rip a hole in your mat, or for me, wood floors, until the outer hips activate. We're doing this because we want to anterior tilt here. I'm going to teach you a little bit of anatomy because it's my favorite. So press down into the heels and pull the heels apart, and the muscles of the outer hips are the anterior tilting muscles. So bring your hands to 1 or 2 blocks, and as the outer hips activate, see if you can start to lift the tail towards the sky. So you start to come towards a back bend, right? So maybe you bring your hand to your low back and you say, gee, my back bending. And I'm not looking for this to get a back bend. Keep the torso where it is maybe, but start to lift the tail. Bend the knees a lot more, that will help with range of motion. Pull the heels apart, that will activate those muscles, and release, cool. So we'll come down into lizard once again. We press straight down into the front heel, but now we're gonna press to the inner heel, right? So that the knee comes in. We take a little bit of that pinching off through the hip. For me, actually, all of the pinching off goes away when I come to there. And then find that action of lifting the butt to the sky. And we'll turn around this way so you can see. When I lift, gained a little bit more range of motion. The sits bones are lifting up, and just like in a forward fold, I can now bring my torso down. And I have to readjust, pressing through the inner heel so that the knee doesn't just splay out to the side. So number 3, we're going to look at is extension on that back leg. And the struggle with extension on the back leg can come from the quadricep muscles, maybe, right? They're in the front of the leg. It can come from the hip flexors. We're trying to get them to go in the other direction. It can also be as a result of tension in the adductors, the inner leg line, that creates a struggle with shifting the weight forward, right? We've gotten rid of it's too much pressure on the front hip. We've played around with that a little bit. We have anterior tilt, so a little bit more range of motion so we can fold in. So now we have to look at what can we adjust in the back leg that's going to help us to get deeper into the pose or to where we want to be in the pose. So there's a couple of things. One is the rotation of the back leg. And so often we don't really think about this. Sometimes it has to do with tension in the outer hip line that will just open, and then we feel all this tension in the inner leg line. And so what I like to do in this pose is I like to create a little bit of an internal rotation in the back leg. It just feels more comfortable for me, and I've noticed with my students it's helpful. So give it a try. So we're going to play around. I want you to remember what the difference between internal and external rotation is, right? So we'll draw one leg up. So it's a movement of the thigh bone. When I rotate my thigh bone in towards the midline, that's internal rotation. So the thigh bone's rotating in. The knee goes in, the foot goes out. That's what happens with internal rotation. External rotation, the thigh bone moves away from the midline. The foot might come in, the knee might go out. Internal rotation, external rotation. And so it might seem more like a hugging in, but I do want you to work that rotational piece. So we're in extension, and we're trying to open the muscles, the flexor muscles, essentially. And so sometimes what is helpful with that is when you engage the flexor muscles. So where you might hit extension, where this might be flexion, and now I'm going to walk through all of the adjustments. We press into the front heel, find a little anterior tilt, and what happens with anterior tilt is it also softens the hip flexors a little on that back leg. A little bit of an internal rotation. And then I'm going to drag the back knee diagonally towards the front heel. Lift my sits bones a little bit more, get a little more J-Lo action here. Get a lengthen my stand. And then maybe I start to find my way down inside the foot. So give it a try, play around with it, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your feedback. Have an awesome day.